Hi, this is Kevin Annett with a very important breaking news announcement from the Prosecutor's Office of the International Common Law Court of Justice. This is May 14th, 2014. The Ninth Circle child sacrificial cult members, locations, and dates are identified to the court. Prosecutor issues a call for special deputies to stop the Ninth Circle's trafficking and murder of children. Brussels. As the third session resumes in the court's historic case into child trafficking and cult murder, the prosecutor today introduced remarkable new evidence that names the identities of top Ninth Circle cult members. The same evidence also positively identifies when and where some of the Ninth Circle rituals are being conducted, involving the routine rape, torture, and murder of children and newborn babies. Quote, senior Ninth Circle members include Jorge Bergoglio and Joseph Ratzinger, so-called popes of the Church of Rome, Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby, 2 British High Court judges, at least 1 Catholic bishop in Canada, senior government ministers in Belgium and England, and members of the British, Dutch, and Belgian royal families, unquote. Stated a news release from the prosecutor's office today. Quote, the most recent gatherings of the Ninth Circle occurred in the crypt of Carnarvon Castle in Wales, and within a subterranean vault beneath Marie Reine du Monde Roman Catholic Cathedral in Montreal, Canada. At least 2 of the primary defendants were identified at these recent gatherings where children under 5 years of age were ritually killed. The next major conclave of the Ninth Circle at the Montreal Cathedral at 1085 Rue de la Cathédrale is scheduled for August 15th, 2014, unquote. Now, in response to this startling evidence, the 5 court judges adjourned the trial proceedings today to allow the prosecutor's office to issue a call for special deputies to take immediate action to stop these murderous rituals of the Ninth Circle. As Kevin Annett, special assistant to the prosecutor, describes, quote, I was awoken after midnight by a call from Brussels alerting me to the prosecution's demand that special deputies be immediately sworn and prepared to take direct action to stop the Ninth Circle's murder of children. So I've instructed all 39 of our local chartered common law groups to do exactly that. We want the men and women who are now being trained as our police force to realize that children are dying horribly as we speak. Protecting those children will be the first job of our trained sheriffs. They will be detaining and incarcerating the guilty, and they will be deputizing other men and women to form direct action units to enforce the standing arrest warrants against criminals like Joseph Ratzinger and Elizabeth Windsor. We can only protect our children by tracking down and stopping those who are raping and killing them today, starting with the sick monsters known as the Ninth Circle, unquote. Offers to assist in such direct action against the Ninth Circle have already been received from policemen and politicians in Europe, and from local sheriffs and active service marshals and soldiers in America. Last week, the court commenced training programs for common law peace officers in 13 countries. For information how to join the nearest training program and their direct action units, write to itccscentral@gmail.com or phone 386-323-5774 at the ITCCS office in the United States. That's 386-323-5774. This has been issued by the Public Information Agency of the Prosecutor's Office, May 14th, 2014, in Brussels. I thank you.
Scott Herron here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. As we turn now to whistleblowers and the unprecedented attack they've come under during the Obama administration. Invoking the Espionage Act of 1917, the administration has pressed criminal charges against no fewer than 6 government employees, more than all previous administrations combined. Last week, we spoke to one of the country's most well-known whistleblowers, Thomas Drake, who was targeted after challenging mismanagement, waste, and possible constitutional violations at the National Security Agency, that top-secret agency that is a number of times larger than the CIA. He was one of several sources for a Baltimore Sun article about a $1.2 billion NSA experimental program called Trailblazer to sift through electronic communications for national security threats. As a result, he faced up to 35 years in prison for charges under the Espionage Act, but he was never actually accused of spying. The case ended last year in a misdemeanor plea deal. Today, we air part 2 of our discussion with Thomas Drake and his attorney, Jesselyn Radack, a former ethics advisor to the Department of Justice, currently Director of National Security and Human Rights at the Government Accountability Project, the nation's leading whistleblower organization. Her new book is called Traitor, the Whistleblower and the American Taliban. I did the interview along with Democracy Now!'s Nermeen Sheikh last week and began by asking Jesselyn Radack to talk about whistleblowers today and what's happening to them under the Obama administration.
Yes, in fact, he said that whistleblowers were courageous and patriotic, yet he has led an unprecedented war on whistleblowers. And while whistleblowers have always been retaliated against and harassed unmercifully under prior administrations, this is the first administration to actually start indicting them and doing so under the heavy-handed Espionage Act, which could land them in jail for the rest of their lives. There are 6 such prosecutions going on right now of people who revealed information that exposed fraud, waste, abuse, illegality, and a danger to public health and safety. Tom Drake was the first person among that recent spate of crackdown prosecutions.
And in a nutshell, Thomas Drake, though we spoke on Democracy Now! About your case, explain what happened, what you did, how you became a whistleblower, and what happened to you.
Well, under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, I actually originally had made contact with congressional staffers during the late 90s, interestingly enough, regarding NSA's massive fraud, waste, and abuse on contracts. They were in fundamental violation of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So there had already, in essence, a pre-existing means by which I was informing Congress regarding what was going on at NSA. In 2001, though, after 9/11, is when I found out that NSA was an abject violation of the first commandment at NSA, which was you do not spy on Americans without a warrant. And that's, as James Bamford had pointed out earlier in your segment on Democracy Now!, is because of significant abuse during the 60s and 70s under the programs that he mentioned, as well as a number of others, COINTELPRO, where they were actually in violation, without even FISA, but they're in violation of the Fourth Amendment rights of Americans. So political dissidents, journalists who were not liked by administrations, peace activists, anti-war activists, were being spied upon on a routine basis by the intelligence agencies, including NSA, within the United States of America. That led to a whole series of hearings. You had the Watergate, of course. You had basically the Nixon administration, the president is above the law. Whatever the president says is legal. Never would I've imagined that would have come full flower post 9/11, and in fact makes the Nixon administration, that whole era, look like pikers. And so I ended up finding, because of where I was, I had people coming to me privately with significant concerns about, what are we doing, Tom, spying on Americans? I thought there's a legal regime by we were supposed to follow. We have a court that we go to in secret, with the probable cause evidence. Yet now we're tossing it overboard, and we're treating our own country, okay, as is the equivalent of a foreign nation for the purpose of dragnet electronic surveillance. And so you had that combined with a massive infusion of billions and billions of dollars. Basically, Congress was writing blank checks to NSA. I mean, in fact, I remember being in meetings where they would say, how big do you want it and how soon do you want it? They were just going to write the check. This is even stuff that was well off the program, for the record. Supplemental funding, significant redistribution of wealth going right into the pockets of many of the defense contractors. The very thing that Eisenhower warned us about during his farewell address. So I became part of a Department of Defense Inspector General audit investigation. I was one of the unnamed senior official in a hotline complaint that was given to the DUDIG in September 2002, signed by Diane Wark, Ed Loomis, Kirk Wiebe, and Bill Binney, pointing out the vast waste and fraud being committed by the program called Trailblazer, which at the time was under Hayden's direction, had become the flagship program for how NSA was going to meet the demands and the challenges of the digital age.
Thomas Drake, can you talk about what happened to your life as you blew the whistle on fraud, mismanagement, and what you considered the evisceration of the First Amendment, the spying on American citizens?
My life was turned upside down, both personally and professionally. I can't begin to describe. I even had, close colleagues and friends who listened to me in horror as to what I went through during the course of the last number of years.
How many years did you?
Well, from the point, remember, there was this massive, multi-year, multi-billion-million-dollar criminal national security investigation. It was launched in late December 2005 as a result of the Risen and Lichtblau article. And so they went with extreme vengeance, looking for whoever leaked or was the source for that article.
They're, by the way, still being investigated, right?
Well, James Risen, in particular, is part of the Jeffrey Sterling case. Interestingly enough, the lead prosecutor for that case is the same one that led the prosecution in my case, William Welsh. Well, in terms of my life being turned upside down, when they launched that multi-million-dollar investigation, there was concern because of that article. It caused quite a stir within the intelligence community and in particularly NSA. And you had people within NSA say, my gosh, what are we doing? But this investigation, which as it turns out involved 5 full-time prosecutors and 25 full-time agents, I ultimately was caught up in that investigation. One of the great concerns is that because there was a very limited number of people who knew about the program, the name of that program is referenced in James Bamford's Wired magazine article, called Stellar Wind. Very few people knew about that program. It was only whispered in the halls of NSA. It was a super top secret program. It was one that was not mentioned at all, even within NSA. It was that sensitive. And so the number of people that were actually read into that program, the number of people that were associated with that program were quite small. What started happening, though, in those short weeks right after 9/11, and particularly for the first week in October when I actually found out about this program being approved by the White House and NSA becoming the executive agent for the program, and that all was legal and not to pursue this anymore, I was really warned about not to ask any more questions.
And explain what Stellar Wind was.
Well, Stellar Wind was this dragnet electronic surveillance program that it exponentially grew by leaps and bounds. In fact, when the Patriot Act was passed in October in Congress, NSA was already in violation of the Patriot Act. We're talking about, remember, the exclusive means, it's really critical to note that the exclusive means by which electronic surveillance could take place against U.S. persons, which is resident aliens, U.S. corporations, and U.S. citizens, the exclusive means by which you would conduct that activity had to be done under the auspices of FISA. And so it had to be with a warrant, although there were certain conditions where you could do hot pursuit and other, but those were time limited and time constrained. FISA was the exclusive means. If you violated FISA, there were criminal sanctions. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars and many years for each incident. What NSA chose to do in concert with the White House and White House approval was to simply upend that legal regime, which in itself was a compromise hammered out under the Carter administration based on all the previous abuses that had ensued in the previous 2 decades. And so tossing out 23 years under the excuse of 9/11, giving NSA essentially blanket access to all available electronic records, both, anywhere they could find it. What I would hear internally is that we just need to get the data. We don't know where the threat is. We don't know where they may be hiding. There could be secret cells. Hey, and if it means, bypassing the rights of Americans, so be it. Because what's most important is security of the country. Who cares about our liberties? They'll just have to take a back seat for now. I remember actually saying, if that's so, then why don't we change the law? There's a legal means by which you change a law in this country. And that means is through Congress. And if the law wasn't working before, you can modify the law. And in fact, FISA has been modified 5 times since 1978. So here's a chance to modify the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act with a secret court, and there's also an appeals court, all housed in the Department of Justice. So I asked that question. I asked that question to the most senior people at NSA, and I was told Congress will say no. Congress will say no. Why would they say no? 9/11 just happened. And Hayden's going on about wanting to make, we got to make Americans feel safe again, which was one of his other mantras. And yet, they entered into this secret arrangement first week in October, a presidential executive order authorizing the NSA to treat the United States of America as the equivalent of a foreign nation for the purpose of electronic surveillance. And I knew when I had that conversation after Maureen Baginski had told me in writing that they had gone with a different solution, although she did not mention the actual name of the program.
Top person at the NSA.
The third, she was the signals intelligence director at the time. She was also my immediate supervisor. She demurred, and when that was that moment. That was a moment that I knew that the NSA had crossed its Rubicon. It was the moment that the surveillance horse was out of the barn, when it was made very clear to me, it was explicitly clear to me by the Office of General Counsel that this program was authorized by the White House. NSA was the executive agent for this program, is authorized by the White House, and it was all legal, and do not pursue this any further.
And as far as you know, it's still underway. It's
Yes.
still going on, still a wind.
Now, if you follow the legislative trail, and this was Jesselyn Radek's probably in a better position to answer than I am in terms of the legal implications. A compliant Congress, because this is another dynamic here. We have a very compliant Congress with regards to national security, and of course vast streams of money being pumped into the community at the same time. I mean, NSA's budget was essentially doubled within 12 to 18 months. So you have a compliant Congress that began after the revelation of the so-called warrantless wiretapping program. In that New York Times article, Rising Lichtblau, you ended up having legislation sponsored by the executive branch and being passed by Congress to essentially make what had been illegal, legal. So you had the Patriot Act renewal, you had the Protect America Act, you ended up having the FISA Amendments Act in 2008. The immunity was granted to the telecommunication concerns because the Stellar Wind program fundamentally involved some of the most major of our telecommunication companies within the United States.
For quite a time now, Senators Wyden as well as Udall, Wyden from Oregon, Udall from Colorado, have been raising questions about the USA Patriot Act. They have said Americans would be stunned to know what the government thought the Patriot Act was allowed to do. They made their remarks in a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder. They seem constrained that they can't actually say what they know. Jesselyn Radek, have you met with them? What is it that they are warning?
Well, we have met with them, and we have briefed them, including Bill Benny and Kirk Wiebe, who were in James Bamford's article. They were whistleblowers along with Tom Drake.
At the NSA.
At the NSA. And with their informed speculation of what some of these secret interpretations of 215 might be. I do think Udall and Wyden are signaling very strongly. I mean, here they are. This is where we need a whistleblower, and yet we've seen what happens in terms of Tom Drake trying to be prosecuted, and the others all being targets of a federal criminal investigation. And yet here they are again coming forward in Wired magazine and on your show today. And America owes them a huge debt of gratitude, but we need more people to come forward. More people, a lot of people know what Wyden and Udall are talking about and are not saying.
What is it that they're talking about?
I'll let Tom.
That's pretty clear. I mean, Section 215, the secret interpretation, and this is my informed interpretation of the secret interpretation, is basically grants the government access to all business records, subscriber information, phone records. So by under the Section 215, the cover of Section 215 gives the government access for the purposes of national security, blanket access to all those records. So in essence, those companies are essentially forced under the rubric and the rules of national security and monitoring and looking for threats. We need you to give us access and or turn over your records.
But what was the justification for that? Why businesses?
Why businesses? Because there's a tremendous amount of personal information, private information, that is held by businesses. You think about our lives of today in the digital age. You know, you name it. You name your phone records, you name your internet providers, you name all the banks. Any business that would hold information about individuals
And libraries and bookstores.
Libraries and bookstores. Any and all electronic transactions. The crucial and sinister thing about all this is when you have this very large data center being built in Utah, and that's been in progress for some time. And one of the things I heard many, many years ago was we need a place to store it all the time. We're just running out of room. In fact, one of the things that was kind of funny is they were just strapping on hard drives and disk drives wherever they could find them because they were simply running out of room to store the. It was never a problem. This is what's interesting. It was never a problem with collecting the data. The problem is the amount of data now being collected, and NSA essentially wanting it all just so they don't miss anything is vastly larger than the amount of data they used to deal with in kind of the Cold War scenario. They were not structured, whether in terms of operations or the technology, to deal with this type of information. I mean, you're talking at the yottabyte level, which it was geek speak, which is orders of magnitude higher than what you hear about megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes. We're now petabytes. This goes well beyond that.
Yottabytes and petabytes.
Yes, it's basically a way to measure the amount of data, digital data.
And this is the data center, one of the largest in the world, that's being built in Bluffdale, Utah.
But now what's happened, the price, it's gotten down to the point, a terabyte of information, which is an extraordinary, we're talking 1,000 gigabytes. Many home computers now, it's not uncommon to have a 500 gig hard drive or even a multi-terabyte hard drive. You can put a terabyte now on just one portion of a flash drive. 1 terabyte of information. So you can imagine the kind of scale that's involved with this data center, what can actually be stored. Now, what can you do with all that data?
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
What can you do with all that data?
Who's going to go through all of that?
Well, as James Bamford mentioned, it sort of becomes NSA's cloud. And remember, they have all this data there, very high-speed networks that connect it with other centers and other analytic places. And they can access that to figure out, and data mine through all that to figure out what's going on. But but think about what else is possible and what else is actual. If you have that much data on that many people, the ability to be able to target anybody at any time, anywhere, now raises the specter, the Orwellian specter, of what can they do in the assembling information, the vast amounts of information on any one person or persons.
The Jeffrey Sterling case, Jesselyn Raddick, explain that case.
Sure. Jeffrey Sterling is a former CIA officer who has also been charged under the Espionage Act, allegedly for providing information that formed a chapter in James Risen's 2006 book, State of War. Now, here we are in 2012, again, a years-long delay, and in this case, they have taken the step that they didn't in Tom's, where they are going after the reporter. Twice under Bush, James Risen, one of the reporters who had broken the warrantless wiretapping story, was subpoenaed. And then Bush subpoenaed him for a third time. Interestingly, Risen provided an affidavit saying that he learned from people who had appeared before the grand jury that the government had obtained records of his conversations with sources, which is so dangerous. In terms of Sterling himself and what he actually did, what he allegedly revealed was that we gave Iran nuclear information, but it was a ruse. It had a defect in it. But it turns out, in fact, the defect in the nuclear design information was so obvious that the Iranians detected it immediately, and we ended up turning over actually legitimate nuclear information. Now, that is surely of public interest.
Wait, you have to repeat this.
Okay.
About the U.S. giving nuclear weapons intelligence to the Iranians.
Yes, that was a ruse, and they were going to give that information but put in a design flaw, so it would be like giving false information. But the design flaw was so obvious that the Iranians detected it, and in the process, it actually ended up turning over legitimate nuclear design information.
And when was this?
This was back in 2000. Well, Risen wrote about it in 2006. It was part, yes, and it was part of a program called Merlin. Now, clearly, as we march up to war with Iran right now, the way we did with Iraq, clearly it's in the public interest to know if the U.S. accidentally, in a botched program, provided the Iranians with nuclear information. That is something that is legitimate whistleblowing. Whether Sterling calls it whistleblowing or not, it fits the legal definition of whistleblowing. I don't know if Sterling did this or not. These are allegations, but even if he did what they say he did, it revealed a violation of abuse, waste of money, and a big mistake.
Jessalyn Radek, Thomas Drake's lawyer. She's with the Government Accountability Project. She's a whistleblower herself. She's written a new book called Traitor, the Whistleblower and the American Taliban. Thomas Drake is a National Security Agency whistleblower who was prosecuted by the Obama administration after challenging mismanagement, waste, and possible constitutional violations at the NSA. Former Justice Department spokesperson Matthew Miller now says the case may have been a, quote, ill-considered choice for prosecution. Drake faced 35 years in jail. The case ended last year in a misdemeanor plea deal. And that does it for today's broadcast. If you'd like to see the first part of that conversation, go to our website at democracynow.org. Happy birthday to Nermeen Sheikh. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Armin Mate, Nermeen Sheikh, Steve Martinez, Sam Alkaf, Hani Masood, Rabi Karen, Dina Guzder, Chantal Berman, Mansi Khan, and Amy Littlefield, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, engineers.